The ice-cold water hit my face with such force that for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there, frozen in my hand-stitched silk gown, feeling the heavy liquid soak into the delicate fabric, turning the pristine white into a transparent, dripping mess. The entire ballroom of the Pierre Hotel went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic drip-drip-drip of expensive sparkling water hitting the marble floor. My mother-in-law, Beatrice Sterling, stood before me with an empty crystal carafe in her hand and a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face. She didn't look sorry. She looked like she had just won a war. "You look a little thirsty, Clara," Beatrice said, her voice carrying easily through the stunned silence of 500 high society guests. "I thought I would help you cool off. After all, a girl from the gutters like you must be feeling quite overwhelmed by all this elegance. It is a bit much for someone who probably grew up drinking out of a garden hose, isn't it?" I wiped the water from my eyes, my lashes heavy and clumped. I looked at Julian, my new husband. He was standing 3 feet away, his jaw dropped, his face pale with shock. He reached for a linen napkin, his hands trembling as he moved toward me, but his mother stepped firmly between us. She placed a manicured hand on his chest, her eyes never leaving mine. "Don't bother, Julian," she snapped. "She needs to learn that you can buy the dress, and you can buy the ring, but you cannot buy class. She is a stain on this family name, and today, I am simply starting the cleaning process." The guests began to whisper. I saw the judgmental stares, the hidden smirks of the debutantes who had spent the last year trying to claw my eyes out for landing the most eligible bachelor in New York. To them, I was Clara Vance, the girl with the mysterious past and the modest bank account. I was the charity case who had enchanted a billionaire's son. They didn't know that my silence wasn't born of fear. It was born of a secret I had been keeping for 3 years. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at Julian anymore. I looked directly into Beatrice's cold, blue eyes. She thought she was the queen of the jungle because she owned Sterling Global, a massive real estate empire. She thought she had the power to crush me because I had let her believe I was a nobody. I had wanted to see if Julian loved me for me, not for my portfolio. He had passed that test. But Beatrice? Beatrice had just failed a test she didn't even know she was taking. I reached up and slowly unpinned my soaked veil, letting it fall to the wet floor. I leaned in close to her, so close I could smell her expensive French perfume. "Thank you, Beatrice," I whispered. "You just made the easiest decision of my life." I turned and walked out of my own wedding. I didn't run. I walked with my head held high, the wet train of my dress heavy behind me. Julian called my name, his voice breaking, but I didn't stop. I walked through the lobby, past the stunned valets, and straight to the black SUV that had been waiting at the curb since the ceremony began. My driver, Marcus, jumped out, his eyes widening when he saw my state. "Ma'am? What happened?" he asked, reaching for a towel in the back seat. "The plan has changed, Marcus," I said, my voice as cold as the water that had just drenched me. "We aren't going to the airport for the honeymoon. Take me to the penthouse. And call the legal team. Tell them I want the Sterling acquisition finalized by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. No more negotiations. No more mercy." As the car pulled away, I looked out the window at the grand entrance of the Pierre. I saw Julian run out onto the sidewalk, looking frantic, but he was eclipsed by the shadow of his mother standing in the doorway, looking satisfied. She thought she had chased me away. She thought she had protected her empire from a social climber. She had no idea that the girl she just humiliated was the only person standing between her and total bankruptcy. To understand how we got here, you have to understand the world Beatrice Sterling lives in. To her, people are assets or liabilities. Since the day Julian introduced us, I was a liability. I had met Julian at a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. I was wearing leggings and an oversized sweater, hiding my identity while I took a rare day off from running Vanguard Holdings, the multi-billion-dollar private equity firm I had built from the ground up after my father passed away. Julian was charming, humble, and completely unaware of who I was. He loved me because I laughed at his jokes and challenged his ideas. He didn't know I was worth 10 times what his mother was. When he finally took me to meet Beatrice at her estate in the Hamptons, she didn't even offer me a seat. She spent 2 hours talking about the importance of pedigree and how the Sterling bloodline was not to be diluted by commoners. I sat there, sipping tea, watching her dismiss me with every word. I decided then that I wouldn't tell them. I wanted to know if Julian would stand by me even if his mother made my life a living hell. And she did. Over the next year, Beatrice tried to bribe me to leave. She offered me $1 million to disappear. I told her it wasn't enough. She thought I was being greedy. I was actually just insulted by how low she valued my time. She tried to ruin my reputation by planting fake stories in the tabloids, but my PR team suppressed them before they even hit the press. She even tried to set Julian up with a French heiress, but he chose me every single time. The wedding was supposed to be the final straw for her. She had spent the entire week leading up to it sabotaging the arrangements. She cancelled the florist, so I had to call in a favor to get 10,000 lilies delivered overnight. She told the caterers to serve a menu of burgers and fries to mock my supposed upbringing, but I had corrected the order back to caviar and wagyu behind her back. The water incident wasn't an accident. It was her last-ditch effort to break me in front of her peers. When I reached my penthouse, Marcus handed me my encrypted phone. I spent the next 4 hours in a bathrobe, sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the city, dismantling the Sterling legacy. Sterling Global was struggling. They had overextended themselves in the European market, and their stock was plummeting. For months, they had been searching for a mystery buyer to bail them out, someone to inject $500 million into their firm to keep the banks from foreclosing. That mystery buyer was Vortex Acquisitions, a subsidiary of my company, Vanguard. Beatrice thought she was negotiating with an anonymous board of directors in Zurich. She had no idea she was negotiating with the woman she just doused in Evian. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I was no longer the dripping bride. I was dressed in a charcoal gray power suit that cost more than the average person's annual salary. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, tight bun, and my makeup was flawless. I looked like the CEO the world feared. I stepped into the boardroom of Vanguard Holdings, where my executive team was already gathered. "Is the paperwork ready?" I asked, sitting at the head of the table. "Yes, Clara," my lead counsel said, sliding a leather-bound folder toward me. "The Sterlings are already in the waiting room down the hall. They're desperate. Beatrice Sterling signed the preliminary agreement an hour ago. She thinks she's meeting the owner of Vortex to sign the final transfer. She has no idea Vortex is us." "Let them wait another 20 minutes, I said, leaning back. I want her to feel the weight of the silence. 20 minutes later, I walked down the hall to the private conference room. Through the frosted glass, I could see Beatrice pacing. She was wearing a black suit, looking every bit the Iron Matriarch, though her hands were shaking as she checked her watch. Julian was there too, sitting in a chair with his head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. He was still wearing his tuxedo shirt from the night before, the collar unbuttoned. My heart twinged for him, but I knew this had to happen. He needed to see who his mother really was, and he needed to see who his wife really was. I pushed the doors open. Beatrice didn't even look up at first. "Finally," she said, "it's about time. We've been waiting for..." She stopped mid-sentence. Her face went from irritation to confusion, and then to a ghostly, sickly pale. She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. Julian bolted upright, his eyes nearly popping out of his head. "Clara?" He gasped. What are you doing here? How did you get past security? Beatrice found her voice, though it was an octave higher than usual. Get out. This is a high-level business meeting. You have no right to be in this building. I don't care how you found out where I was, you gold-digging little. Sit down, Beatrice, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Beatrice stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. You are in no position to tell me anything. I am here to meet the CEO of Vortex. I am here to save my company. Guards. Security. The door opened, and two of my security detail stepped in. They didn't move toward me. They moved toward the corners of the room, standing at attention. They aren't going to remove me, Beatrice, I said, walking to the head of the table and dropping my folder onto the mahogany surface. Because I am the CEO of Vortex. And I am the chairman of Vanguard Holdings. This building? I own it. Your company? As of 5 minutes ago, I own that too. The silence that followed was even heavier than the one at the wedding. Beatrice looked like she was having a stroke. She clutched the back of a chair, her knuckles turning white. Julian looked between us, the realization slowly dawning on him. Clara? Julian whispered. You're the Vance of Vanguard? The one they call the Ghost of Wall Street? I looked at my husband, my expression softening only slightly. I wanted you to love me for me, Julian. Not for the money. I'm sorry I kept it from you, but given how your mother treats people she thinks are beneath her, can you blame me? Beatrice finally found her breath. This is a joke. This is some kind of sick revenge plot. You can't possibly own Vanguard. You're a waitress. I checked your background. You checked the background I created for myself, Beatrice, I countered. I grew up in this industry. My father was Arthur Vance. When he died, I took over. I've spent the last decade building an empire while you spent yours looking down your nose at people while your own company rotted from the inside out. You were so blinded by your own arrogance that you didn't even realize you were being bought out by the very person you were trying to destroy. I opened the folder and pushed the final signature page toward her. You signed the intent to sell. If you don't sign this final transfer, Sterling Global goes into default by noon today. You'll lose the estate, you'll lose the Hamptons house, and you'll lose every cent of the Sterling legacy. Or, you sign this. You get enough money to retire in a very modest condo in Florida, and I take over the company. Beatrice looked at the paper as if it were a death warrant. Her lip trembled. She looked at Julian, pleading for help. Julian, do something. She's taking everything. Julian stood up slowly. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, for what seemed like the first time. He saw the cruelty, the desperation, and the ugliness that had been hidden under layers of silk and pearls. Then he looked at me. He saw the woman he loved, the woman who had endured his mother's abuse with a smile, and the woman who was now standing as a titan. She isn't taking it, Mother, Julian said, his voice cold. You gave it away. You gave it away the moment you threw that water. You thought you were showing her who was boss. I think she's just returning the favor. Julian walked over to me. He didn't look at the papers. He looked into my eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I was going to, I said softly. On our honeymoon. I wanted us to have one day of being just Julian and Clara before the world crashed in. But your mother decided to move up the timeline. Julian nodded slowly. He turned back to his mother. Sign the papers, Mom. It's over. Beatrice burst into tears, not the tears of someone who was sorry, but the tears of someone who had lost her power. She grabbed the pen and scribbled her name, the ink smearing on the page. She threw the pen at me, but it missed, bouncing off the table and rolling onto the floor. "I hope you're happy," she hissed. "You've destroyed a family." "No, Beatrice," I said, picking up the folder. "I've acquired a failing asset and pruned the dead wood. That's just good business." I looked at Marcus, who was standing by the door. "Please escort Mrs. Sterling out of the building. She is no longer permitted on any Vanguard or Sterling Global property. Effective immediately, she is banned from the premises." Beatrice screamed as Marcus led her away, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floors until the sound faded into the distance. The room was finally quiet. Julian stayed. He sat back down, looking exhausted. "So," he said, a small, wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Does this mean we're not going to Bali for the honeymoon?" I walked over to him and ran my hand through his hair. "We can go wherever you want, Julian. I own the airline." He laughed then, a genuine, relieved laugh. "I can't believe my wife is my mother's boss. She's going to hate Florida. She'll hate the lack of a personal chef even more," I added. We stood there for a long time, looking out at the city. The drama was over, the revenge was complete, and the balance of power had shifted forever. I had been humiliated in a white dress, but I had triumphed in a gray suit. As we walked out of the boardroom together, Julian stopped and looked at the wet stain on the floor where Beatrice had dropped her water bottle in her hurry to leave. "You know," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead, "I think white was a good color on you. But power? Power looks much better." I smiled, adjusted my blazer, and led my husband toward the elevators. I had a company to run, a legacy to rebuild, and a very long honeymoon to attend to. And for the first time in a long time, there was no one left to tell me I didn't belong. The news of the takeover hit the wires an hour later. The headlines were relentless. Sterling Global bought by Vanguard. The billionaire bride's revenge. Beatrice Sterling ousted in hostile takeover. I turned off my phone and handed it to Marcus as we reached the helipad on the roof. The world could talk all it wanted. I had spent my whole life being underestimated, and I had used that as my greatest weapon. Beatrice Sterling thought she could wash me away with a glass of water. She didn't realize that I was the storm. As the helicopter lifted off, soaring over the skyscrapers of Manhattan, I looked down at the city I owned. The wedding might have been a disaster, but the marriage was off to a very interesting start. And as for Beatrice? I made sure the condo I bought her in Florida had a very, very small garden. I wouldn't want her to get overwhelmed by the responsibility of a hose. The wind from the rotors whipped around us, but for the first time, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't just a bride, and I wasn't just a secret. I was exactly who I was meant to be. I was the boss. And I was just getting started.